welcome to the Newman Bond, the official podcast of Newman University. Today I have the honor of sitting with one of my former professors here at Newman, Dr. Marguerite Regan, who has more than 30 years of teaching experience, and she's the director of Newman's Center for Teaching and Learning. So this episode's really diving into what the Center for Teaching and Learning offers, how it benefits professors, and in turn, our students. So thank you so much for being willing to be on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Amy.
Of course.
It's my honor.
Well, thank you. And when it comes to education, there's a lot of essential ingredients that make it as enriching and holistic as it can be for students. And excellent teaching is, I think, where one of those main ingredients comes into play. So that's the heart of Newman University, is really excellent teaching. We have the privilege of having so many really talented and experienced professors who bring their expertise and pour that into their students. So can you tell us what drew you to the role as the director for Center for Teaching and Learning, and what excites you most about the Center for Teaching and Learning?
Yeah, well, first of all, fewer than 30% of institutions of higher ed have a CTL.
Wow.
And a CTL is a really strong piece of evidence that an institution invests in their teachers and cares about their teacher development. So it's always been a dream of mine for Newman University to have a CTL. And it goes back to my early career. The first 5 years of my career after I earned my PhD and I worked for another small college, they had a very nourishing, nurturing process for faculty development. They really, I want to say, protected and nurtured their young and new faculty, and they had us focusing on peer mentoring and reflective teaching practices and taking risks and experimenting in the classroom. And I think it really set the table for just a program of professional self-care for me. But it taught me a lot. It taught me about growth mindset. It taught me about the importance of metacognition, bringing that to our craft and our science of teaching. And so I think when I arrived at Newman, we didn't have a CTL, and so you were sort of on your own. I mean, we had some professional development funds and things like that, but you were really on your own to chart your course. And I saw how difficult that was for faculty who didn't have the benefit of that solid 5-year foundation that I got, which connected me to societies outside of the university for professional development. Because professional development can be so overwhelming, without a framework and a self-directed plan for, analyzing what you're doing and improving. It just can be overwhelming. There's so much out there in the marketplace. So it was a dream of mine. And when Lori Steiner got us that Title III grant, part of which was to create a Center for Teaching and Learning, she was urging me, you should throw in for this. And I thought, I love this, so I'm gonna throw in for it. And that's how I came to this work of educational development.
I think that your passion that you bring makes you a really good candidate for that as well, and I'm so glad that you've gotten to take these years of teaching and your personal expertise and kind of pour them back into some of your colleagues, to new professors coming in, and you're really helping benefit students in the long run as well. So thank you for being willing to, put your hat in the ring as Lori encouraged you, and for being willing to pour in some of your personal resources and that sense of curiosity and reflection that is so necessary for teachers to really grow professionally. So
it's been my pleasure all the way.
Oh, that's wonderful. So can you tell us what exactly the Center for Teaching and Learning is for those who might not have ever heard of one?
Well, it's basically a space for learning, a space for faculty, students, staff as well. It's a space of learning. And as a learning space, it's a safe space. So like all CTLs, it's built on a client model of privacy and, just confidentiality. I mean, if someone's going to commit murder, that's a whole other issue, but that we don't have that sort of thing going on, thank goodness. But, and it's about peers teaching peers. And it's about bringing together the major players around the instructional core. So a teacher, a student, and then that instructional core, and what happens in that classroom. Those kinds of things that we care about the most, our students, right? That's our first loyalty. I've often said that our first loyalty is to our students. So how can we be the types of professors, the types of faculty members that young people need? And that's always changing too. You know, we're adapting to new circumstances right now, post-pandemic, and now we have this Gen I that's really going to cause us to rethink and redesign a lot.
That's true. Wow. So what kind of specific support and resources does the Center for Teaching and Learning offer? I know you've mentioned in the past maybe workshops or peer observations, that space for collaboration and practice.
Yeah, we
that
have
look like?
some long-term programming, which usually has some good results, and we have some shorter-term programming. And all of it is based on what faculty told us in 2023, that they want to learn about and practice evidence-based behaviors, and they want to do it in community with each other, and they want a reflective practice around it. So the programming is really grows out of who we are and what we value as educators, to create that high trust community where people can learn and grow in. So the programming, we, like this past year, we have faculty learning communities and communities of practice. They're a little bit longer, they're a semester, and they require about 16 to 18 hours of engagement over the course of the semester, but they're very impactful. So our conference will bring in a speaker like Lauren Barbeau and Claudia Happel, who wrote Critical Teaching Behaviors. We brought them in last year, and they sort of just ignite the energy, and then we create post-training support where faculty can come and practice and peer review one another, implement something, and assess it. So in other words, I'm really not a fan of just a one and done model where we come in, we hear the development, and then everybody's like, amen, amen, this is great, we're inspired, but nothing really ever changes because we get back to life, which floods in, the dog, the kids, the crisis over here and over there, and so the changes don't really happen without that community of practice. So those are our long-term programming is around the critical teaching behaviors, and that's a common teaching language that faculty can communicate with each other across disciplines and across ranks and across years of experience. It brings a framework and a common language to our university. So that's been one of our communities of practice. We have another one coming up next year. I'll tell you about that one in a minute. But we also do some shorter term programming, and we offer midterm student evaluations that are facilitated by the CTL and that are built on a critical teaching behaviors validated instrument. So the instruments we're using have been validated, and the purpose of these instruments, and they grow out of Lauren and Claudia's work, is to really try to remove bias from peer observation and to remove bias from student midterm feedback by really focusing on practices and behaviors, concrete practice and behaviors, not like characteristics of a person or personality things. Those really have been hugely problematic in so many student evaluations of teaching, and they don't really have to do with teaching and learning. So the critical teaching behaviors framework has really, tried to articulate those things that we can all see and we can all agree upon, and there's research and evidence that these practices really do work to engage students, to include students, to align our assessments with our objectives, and on and on.
Wow. And I like that you addressed that there are so many distractions and noise, and life gets busy for everybody, no matter what. But for teachers specifically, there's so much limited time in the classroom to really make sure that you're achieving the standards, setting the students up for success, preparing them for whatever quizzes, tests, research that they'll have in the future. But it's also important to carve out that time for professional development and for self-reflection to better themselves as teachers and professors. So why do you think it's so important that people take advantage of the Center for Teaching and Learning, or CTL for short?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're doing the work of development, and development is not mandatory. It's not something you can force someone to do. And so when we do the work, whatever it is, self-care, professional self-care, health self-care, taking up a yoga practice, eating clean, exercising, these are things that we voluntarily take because we recognize, I would like to improve this way. And they're often very hard to do without infrastructure and support. So the CTL is provided really intentionally designed programming that can aid that process. And it's also aided when there's a community and there's a little bit of accountability carved into it. But, I will say this, the faculty members that have engaged and have, really carved out that 18 hours and they've come in community and they've reflected, they'll often say things like, wow, I was so busy and maybe I didn't want to come here, but after I came here, I was so rejuvenated and I felt so connected with other faculty and I had got some insight about where I want to take my teaching next. And so it's kind of, I think about this as a regular exerciser. Sometimes I don't want to go to the gym. And I'm like, oh, I can't get off the couch. I'm exhausted. But, after I go to the gym and I do the practice, whatever it is, yoga or weights or dance, I never regret it. Right. I never leave the place going, I wish I hadn't have done that. I always leave it feeling like I really needed to do that.
Yeah.
So it really is, carving things out. And so we try to make it a light, we try to hit that sweet spot for how much engagement do we need in terms of time and obligation to have an effect, okay? And how much is too much? And is there a sweet spot? Well, ed developers all over the country are trying to find that sweet spot because we're all up against this, right? So how do we make that step? And I think what Lauren and Claudia have done that I really love in this book, Critical Teaching Behaviors, this framework that faculty are working with, is they've really foregrounded instructor agency. And our instructors that come and work with this, they feel that they're validated. Because teaching can be overwhelming. It's like parenting. You wish somebody would just tell you the right way to do it. Well, there is no such thing, and every kid's different, and every circumstance is different. And so it's been really validating. Like, wow, I'm okay. I'm doing some things right. And then what it does is it invites them with the framework to open up into, oh, I could be trying this, or I could be trying that. So it's very self-directed. And I think, like any kind of developmental activity, exercise, therapy, whatever, it has to be self-directed.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And that motivation needs to come from within. So we are trying our hardest to supply infrastructure and designs and communities and programming that can really, facilitate faculty to pursue their development.
Yeah, and risk take, like you said, in a place that's more trusting and safe before they start applying it to their classrooms, and can learn from one another too, because, like you said, everybody's different in their teaching approach. Everybody has different ways to adapt to student needs. So being able to share those with our wealth of resources here at Newman with our professors is really valuable.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful to watch faculty work together, and like in the peer observation program, we pair faculty across disciplines. And that's one of the, we give you a partner to work with in the peer observation, and you have to be from a different department, but we also pair them according to years of experience and rank, so there's no power differential, because that can get in the way. And when you see the faculty really working together and they go into one another's class, and I saw you work in that ed puzzle, and I saw how engaged your students were. I really want to try that ed puzzle now in my class. So we've really opened up our classrooms, and it's giving everyone ideas.
Yeah.
They're learning that, in nursing they use the ed puzzle, and I can apply this to my art history class, and I'm going to try this, and they feel a sense of peer support there.
Yeah, and that creativity probably helps that rejuvenation too, that renewed spirit of, this is why I do what I do. This is why I love to teach.
And I really love seeing that happen in the Center for Teaching and Learning.
So going back to peer observation, how has that community of practice really resonated with faculty?
Yeah, it's unlike anything we've ever done before here, because observation in the past was we talk about this in the early days of the peer observation community. It was associated with almost like traumatic experiences, like being graded as a student, not making the 4.0 or the A or whatever, and you focus on the negative criticism, or somebody has power over you in terms of a teacher or a job. So there's always that evaluative piece there. And there's always some trauma in everyone's past about being evaluated. It's just part
scary.
of the...
You're vulnerable.
Yeah, and so you go into performance mode when you're being evaluated this way by somebody who maybe... So that's been our experience. So this has been a new way of... Because it has nothing, it's not tied to evaluation. It's tied to development, and there's privacy around it and peer support. And so faculty are appreciating these benefits of, the flexibility of it and the peer engagement around it and learning about themselves. Because I think when you really strip everything back and you look at what happens between a teacher and the classroom around that core, who are the prime data points on how well you're doing? It's student feedback, okay? It's also peer feedback, people that are in the craft with you, people that go into the classroom that have those kinds of challenges that can come into your class, maybe not as a subject matter expert, but as a fellow teacher, and see what's happening in that classroom and give you some feedback, because we all have these blind spots.
Right.
And we're trying to run a class, and we can't always see how our students are engaging or maybe how they're not engaging. But somebody else can come in and give us some insight on that, and we can get insight from our students. And then also the reflection piece. It has to be driven by, faculty agency and faculty reflection. So those three pieces. This is what the communities of practice, but the peer observation community of practice really does, is it tries to get at that peer piece and foregrounding that. So even when the peer comes in and there's a debrief discussion later, it's about the art of reflective conversation. So we also do training in that in our peer review program, our peer observation program. We do some mock debriefs.
Well, that's really valuable. And that can be applied immediately. I mean, being able to connect with your coworkers, but also start applying it to your classes the very next day.
It actually helps us up our feedback game everywhere.
That's good.
And you may remember in this studio, Dr. Hain and Dr. Smith, they created some videos for our peer observation community of practice. Yes. And they were debriefs. And it was we just randomly kind of filmed them. I said, can we just film you doing something? And they were like, yeah, sure. Anyways, your staff set this up, and they sat right here at this table, and they did a debrief session. And it was just so graceful and masterful, the way it wasn't a critique. It was the instructor leading the conversation with a reflective partner. And it was done so brilliantly that the Critical Teaching Behaviors Project picked up our two faculty, and they bumped some other videos they had from Harvard's teaching center. Wow. And they put our faculty members on there for the mock debrief project.
That's amazing.
That feedback piece, that's just some way that we can always continue to grow in giving and receiving feedback with grace and allowing the person who's being observed to lead that dance.
And that process has been recognized not only, and celebrated at Newman, but also nationally. Can you tell us a little bit about the American Association of Colleges and Universities conference in Puerto Rico and how some of Newman's practices were kind of showcased there as a model?
So again, our faculty and our CTL partnered with Lauren Barbeau, one of the authors of this book, and we gave a presentation in April on the leading institutional change track at the AACNU in San Juan. And the collaboration that we're having with the authors of Critical Teaching Behaviors Project really has to do with the fact that we've really implemented, I don't want to say wholesale, but almost wholesale, we're getting there, what they've managed to do in the Critical Teaching Behaviors Project. Mm-hmm. So, and just a little bit about that. Their book is a wonderful synthesis of 20 years of ed theory and ed research, and it's really accessible and practical and easy for faculty members, and it's flexible and self-directed, so they can easily jump into this kind of work. But what we've done at Newman is we've actually implemented it. So we've actually practiced it. We put it into motion. And so what Lauren was interested in was, wow, you took our work and you embedded it in a community of practice. They don't really do that in here.
Right.
They have a midterm student evaluation, peer observation, and reflection tools around the framework, but we embedded them in a year of community of practices. So she was really interested in marrying the theory and the practice of critical teaching behaviors. So we showcased the work that our faculty have been doing this past year, and particularly the piece of, I think the faculty have found this to be what I call a high trust process, a trustworthy process. That's just been, faculty who have engaged in it with, heart and soul, or just time, really. They say that it's trustworthy, okay? And it really tries to eliminate bias, and it gives us direction. And so we were interested in the trustworthy process, plus what we've done at Newman, which is part of our mission, to create that high trust communities of learners so that we can unleash our potential, because we all have this potential.
Yeah.
How do we bring that out? So she was interested in how we created this high trust community. And so we showcased our work.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I know it might be hard to pinpoint, but can you walk me through how you've seen students benefit, or how maybe some of the professors who have gone through the framework have noticed a difference in student outcomes because of their time and investment in the peer observation process?
Yeah, now that's an interesting piece, because you're getting into what's called the scholarship of teaching and learning. That's when you begin to assess the impact of strategies and practices that you try in the classroom. So we're in our first year. It's our infant stage. And we are moving more in the direction of doing some scholarship of teaching and learning. But there were some faculty that were really on the front end of that and anticipating it, and they tried some practices in their classroom, like, they tried to rewrite an assignment, for example, to make it more transparent according to like an evidence-based framework. And then we did a focus group with the students about the before and after assignment and how they experienced it, and the after assignment was experienced as way more supportive.
Oh, good.
Of their learning. It was more purposeful, it was more scaffolded, they felt not discouraged when they got the assignment, right? Because sometimes we all as students, we can feel very discouraged. You read about that 10-page paper and you just contract, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that was an example of faculty trying a practice and then taking it through to that assessment. And we'll be doing a little bit more of that next year. In our learning assistant program, we're going to talk about a SOTL project with our learning assistants and faculty to begin to assess the impact of that pedagogical partnership in the classroom on the students. And we'll be collecting some data on that.
Wonderful.
Now, as far as student learning outcomes in classes goes and data, that really is something that the CTL has, I don't want to use the word jurisdiction, but there's a line there. This is the faculty member. This is the instructor who collects that data from the students in the actual class. So we're moving in that direction of being able to assess impact. Right now we're exploring, we're learning, we're trying.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is the final, that closes the loop there, okay, how we begin to assess that impact. And that's been sort of like on year 2 and year 3 of our larger 5-year plan for the center.
I gotcha. Well, very good. How would you encourage other faculty members who've maybe heard from their fellow colleagues how successful this program has been for them? What would you say to them to encourage them to maybe take advantage of some of the CTL's resources, workshops, peer observation, all of it?
I would say, first of all, this is your space. And whether you want to join in some long-term programming that begins semester to semester, that's open. But we do have some short-term programming if maybe you're just sitting on 10,000 committees and tied up with all kinds of other things. You can dip in through some of the short-term programming. We did these AI lightning talks, lunchtime lightning talks last semester, and we'll be doing maybe some small bites pedagogy this year with CTL consultants who have been through this process, and they're practicing and developing include and engage strategies, align, assess strategies. So we'll be doing more like Spark workshops or Simulive broadcasts where we'll have them maybe do a screencast and then put it up at the same time and engage in the chat with faculty so they can stay in their offices. We're working all that out right now. So there's shorter term programming, and even, shy of that, if you can't do that, then come over and teach a class in the CTL. Hold an office hour in the student center or in the CTL, because the ultimate vision is that this is an all learner space. We're not there yet. Obviously, there's still, students are even beginning to, through the CTL, beginning to talk the language of their learning. Okay, because we also are trained as students to, give 5 stars, go to professor this, find something wrong with the personality. And really, when we work with students, and we have been working with students in a very limited way through our first year, but when we work with them, whether it's the midterm student evaluation process or in our LA program, one of the things we really direct the conversation toward is your learning. Okay, and then we also give some vocabulary and priming for, how do we think about our learning and how do we talk about our learning? Because that's also a new conversation around here.
Absolutely.
So, in the dream, the vision is that all learners engage in this space and in this programming and reach their full potential.
Well, I could definitely see that happening here at Newman, especially with you spearheading it.
Oh, thank you.
That passion and everything. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. I loved what you said about we're all students, we're all learning, we can all benefit from some of these practices, and really when we invest in our professors and pour into them, the students are going to benefit for sure. So thank you again to Dr. Regan for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
And we hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Newman Bond. We release new episodes every first and third Tuesday of the month, so be sure to join us on the next one.